Okay, I think we're live. I'm just waiting for the stream to catch up, the monitor. Yeah, we are good to go, and I'm playing the intro.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Hello and welcome to a special live streamed episode of Tech.0, the show about technology, people and politics with Chris and Ben. You're listening to episode 10, released in August 2021. My name is Ben, and as ever, I'm joined by Chris.
Hi.
In this episode, we'll be having a chat about the Valve Steam Deck. Let's get to it.
Thanks a lot for that, Ben. Right. So Valve recently announced the Steam Deck after a lot of rumors that this would be coming, and they kind of surprised everyone. I would say particularly with the RDNA 2 graphics core. I think that was the real big shock that happened. So just before I carry on, for those who might not have be fully up to speed, the Steam Deck is a handheld gaming console, very much kind of familiar to like the Nintendo Switch, maybe a bit chunkier, but it plays full PC games and runs Linux. Specs, it's got a quad-core Zen 2 processor and a RDNA 2 GPU in it, which makes it very, very similar in architecture to the modern consoles, but a much more cut-down version of it, with lower power draw and a 720p screen. They expect something like 2 to 8 hours battery life. And I think the most interesting thing, I suppose, from our side, as well as the RDNA 2 graphics card, is it's running Linux. I don't know if you've had a chance to play with Proton at all, Ben, or...
I'm speaking to you with from Linux today, and so being a Linux user when I'm not on my work Mac, yes, every time I play a Steam game, it's either natively. There are a few games that run natively under Linux, but if not, I'm running it on Proton.
It's like, how well does that actually work? I've not had much of a chance to tinker with it.
I've literally got no idea what games are Proton and which ones are native. There are a few games that I do know. I've forgotten what they are off the top of my head, but there are a few games that you do know because they just don't work. So I guess there's sort of like a four-tiered approach. There's like native games on Linux. Then there's just works seamlessly with Proton, don't need to do anything. Then there's it's not been, if you like, certified to work with Proton, and therefore you need to go and like fiddle some switches to get it working at all, and then it works flawlessly. And then the final tier is you need to go and do that fiddling, and it just still doesn't work at all.
Right.
I'm guessing it needs some particular Windowsy bits that haven't been put there just yet.
So Valve are claiming, and I don't know, I'm a little bit skeptical, but they're claiming that the next release of Proton will have basically 100% compatibility.
I'd be interested to understand how they're so confident.
They seem immensely confident with that aspect of it, at least. I agree with you. I think that's shocking.
Fair enough. It was a number of years ago, but I remember running the Elder Scrolls Obsidian under Wine, which Proton is as far as I understand it, a proprietary like fork of it. I think that Valve have been pumping
open source as far as I'm aware.
Still open source,
yeah,
brilliant. But it's come from the same code base as Wine.
Yes,
there was Obsidian played flawlessly under Wine. We're talking about probably 9 years ago, 10 years ago. Except there was this one bit where you ran into a house and there were 3 witches there. And if one of the witches cast an invisibility spell, not only would it crash the game, it would kernel panic Linux, and your whole machine would go sideways.
yeah.
So it's I bet there's going to be a couple of edge cases.
I think if it's a couple of edge cases, I think that's fine. Yeah, I think Valve will get away with that. The problem is if it's more than a couple of edge cases. It's when it's like
Absolutely.
even if like 10% of the library doesn't work, I think people who are buying a Steam Deck with the expectations that comes with are going to have an issue with it. So I was going to bring this up a bit later, but I recently bought this. This is the X Player, and it's in some ways a lot simpler than the Steam Deck. So it's not got the fancy controls. It's only got the X input, like the Xbox controller controls on it, and because it's got the new Intel 1165 G7 in it, the graphics drivers aren't quite there yet, and I'd say there's probably there's issues with somewhere between 10 to 20% of my library of games I want to play on it. That's the key bit there, is that's going to change very much depending upon the person that you are. And Intel are working on it, and they're pushing out fixes. So stuff has started working on it that wasn't beforehand. But yeah, I think that device has gets away with it a little bit, because the type of person that spends the money you have to spend to get one of these from China is going to be aware that there's going to be some edge cases. Like they're going,
Yes.
they I got it because I really wanted handheld gaming before the Steam Deck was announced, and I was super excited for months, and I basically haven't put it down for 2.5 weeks, if not probably more than that, 4 weeks.
So how much are we looking at for the Steam Deck? Have prices been announced yet?
Yeah, they have, and that's actually a really impressive bit. To some, well, within some reason. Let me think. Because let me just double check, because there are different versions of it, which don't have differences in level of power, but they do have differences in storage. So there's the 64 gig model, which I would imagine really is for indie games and Steam in-home streaming or remote streaming even, which it comes in at £349, which I think is quite reasonable for a certain type of user. I'm not saying I think everybody will be there, but I think someone who plays a lot of indie games and they've already got gaming PC, so the few big games they play they can stream, I think they could find that works fine.
Yep.
The next tier up is £459, so we've got an extra 110 on top of that. That comes with 256 gig of NVMe storage. The previous one was eMMC, so that's like SD card storage. And then the top end one, which I might have pre-ordered, is £569 with 512 gigabytes of storage, which is half of what the X Player has. And I will say that is giving me some concern. Like the X Player with a terabyte of storage is still kind of tight, depending upon what sort of games you play.
That's kind of interesting. Just looking at having a quick look at so an Xbox would currently set you back around about 250 quid. Now that is literally, you have to plug it into your TV. It's tethered to whatever room you put that in with the your power socket. The Switch comes in. They've got a light version that's about 200. And the regular version that seems to be around about 270.
Yeah.
I've not played with the Switch. I don't not really even read much around it, but I'm guessing that all of the games are sort of a cartridge based. I don't know if it's all digital download.
There's both basically.
Both. Yeah. So that and understandably the Switch developers will be very much creating for it, and my understanding is, which I'd like to get around this a little bit later on as well, is that Valve are not asking people to develop for the Steam Deck. The messaging seems to be at the moment, we support everything.
Yeah, so they have actually gone out to game studios and given them test devices
Mm.
The idea, I think, is very much make sure your game runs on this, please.
Yes.
Which I think makes a lot of sense. I can imagine a lot of studios being willing to do. It's probably, given the fact that it's relatively straightforward, like you're still dealing with Windows APIs, etc. Hopefully, if there are any issues, they would resolve them for hopefully not too much time.
Mm.
And then there was another side to this, and it's completely gone.
I was pointing out the price differences, and that maybe some of the restrictions that you'll have in a form factor like this. People developing for the Switch are very much developing for the Switch, and for the Steam Deck, people are going to, I presume, at the moment, be developing for generically the PC, and the Steam Deck is saying, we will support it, and hey, if you do some extra bits.
So as well as trying to encourage developers to at least make sure their game will work and work reasonably well on it, the other side that Valve have pointed out is that at the moment, certainly the PC market, and I would say also the console market, have a preference for high resolution, high frame rate. So even the modern consoles are talking about 4K 60 FPS. And okay, it's a reconstructed 4K, and sometimes you might have some games that drop a little bit below 60 FPS at times. But by reducing this down to a 720p screen, so you've got much lower resolution, and setting 30 FPS as your low bar, like they have said they don't want any modern games running under 30 FPS.
Yes.
By doing that, you've created a situation where you can kind of ensure that, like with the power that this has got, like it's got to do all of that, but in such a much smaller scale that hopefully it will be able to run most games reasonably well. I think the only one that they have kind of demonstrated is Control. And people were saying when they were trying to count the frames on the Control footage, it wasn't constantly hitting 30. Like it was a little bit laggier. And that, I think, was echoed by some of the people in the that did the hands-on. I don't know if you saw any of that. But Valve had a bunch of sort of tech YouTubers and other media outlets down at their offices and gave them a chance to try it out. And they were all said it was really good. Felt really comfortable. A few games did have little issues with it. There's something else that I think people have been worried about is a lot of the storage side of it. They've talked about Valve have been saying, you can expand it with an SD card. And I was very skeptical of that at first, but having played with the X Player, which by the way has an SD card slot that is, I think, about 4 times slower than the Steam Deck's. Like it runs at about 30 megabytes a second.
Oof.
Yeah, it's sort of slower than a hard drive. Yeah. But and that can be a pain at times, but actually for relatively small games and for games that load everything into memory, so indie titles or titles that happen in like a single area, like maybe twin stick shooters, and anything sort of under 10 gig in size, I've actually found it's fine, and it's let me move the smaller games off onto the SD card, keep the bigger games on the NVMe, and save probably a full 50 to 100 gig with just all my tiny games being somewhere else. And sure, the load times are a little bit longer, but it's not normally a big deal. I
think what the killer feature of an SD card is if you position it, if you market the SD card slot as extending storage and not removable storage, the real killer feature would be, and I doubt they have this, is the Steam Deck understanding what you've just said and going, hey, I've noticed that this game puts all of its data into memory. Let's fish out and put it onto the SD card, because this big game here that doesn't fit into memory or that constantly is going back and reading from the disk. Let's put that on the internal storage because I can get to that faster. Because it makes it, at the moment, what you've just described,
Mm-hmm.
I can see that coming up in like a hack video. Whereas, because it's something that you understand, and it's something that if you want this to be used by just consumers, I mean, even, savvy gamers,
Yeah.
you're going to want to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, so I think some of that will be a little bit less of an issue on the Steam Deck. Their SD card is looking to be like 100 megabytes a second, which
But
is
you need a compatible SD card as well for that.
yes, yeah. So you'd be buying a more expensive SD card as a result of that. But you're looking at it being the hard drive equivalent compared to an SSD, which
Yes.
that's something that's really difficult. Is who's this marketed at? Because existing gamers are gonna, like PC gamers, are going to get that. And I think I've just realised that my face has died again on the stream. So I'm
It's still streaming.
very sorry for that, everyone. We're gonna go with Ben and my voice. Um, so yeah, the SD card, I think will be acceptable for a lot of games.
Yeah.
I think when they've been demoing it, Valve have been demoing purely on the SD cards.
Okay.
And a lot of the reason for that has been that they've put a lot of work into being able to swap backwards and forwards. So I think someone was actually midway playing a game, took the SD card out, the Steam Deck detected that had happened, and then closed the game, so you got whatever autosave you last had.
Yeah.
Not ideal in some ways, but there's not much more that could really be done at that point. But stops it from crashing, stops the game from having any sort of failure condition or corrupting a save or anything. And then you can put it back in, and the game reappears in your Steam library. So actually swapping out SD cards with different parts of your Steam library is quite a reasonable thing to do. In those circumstances, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's quite interesting. One of the things that I'd heard, I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago now, and they were talking to, this is terrible because I've forgotten the chap's name, but he'd spent a lot of time advocating for games and other programs, but games running natively under Linux, and had helped a lot of studios port games and make sure they run on Linux natively. One of the things that I'm really interested in is Valve have effectively turned around to developers and said, don't develop for Linux, develop for Proton.
Yes.
Which I find really interesting. It definitely puts a lot of confidence into their compatibility layer, that Proton.
Yes.
It also means that Linux outside of Steam doesn't benefit.
I thought, as I understood it, I think Proton will run without Steam.
So it might do. I actually have no idea how easy or difficult that would be.
I mean, maybe I'm being a bit pragmatist here, but let's say that literally tomorrow, the age of the Linux desktop came, and 90% of the world swapped to using Linux overnight. Yeah. Even in that situation, which I think is idealized, we'd end up with a huge back catalogue, a lot of games going back for decades that were bound to Windows APIs.
Yes.
So I think Proton is necessary, whatever the situation. It probably will also discourage developers from adding specific Linux support, because it will probably be the easiest way to go
It
about supporting Linux?
I've kind of got two thoughts on it. I think that on the one hand, if you're basically saying, look, carry on developing for Windows and just make sure you support Proton, it means that development studios that are not particularly due diligent are just going to hear that and hear uh, develop for Windows, and then
Hmm.
Proton's going to sort out everything else. And Microsoft, as far as I am aware, don't publish, but they've got a published set of APIs. There's nothing stopping a development studio from using a private API in Windows.
Hmm.
Um, Windows can change that whenever they like, and while the game might hiccup on Windows, I'm just wondering how that
So
plays. That kind of scenario
yeah,
plays with
I
Proton.
think one thing we do know is that Microsoft and Windows in general have been good at. I mean, I think it's part of their problem in some ways,
Mm,
but very good at that backwards compatibility. So I very much doubt that Microsoft are going to just kill APIs randomly.
yes.
Um, you know, overnight. It will happen over time, sure. Um, I hope. I think the best we can hope for in the current circumstance is that developers look at Proton as a target rather than just Windows.
And this is what I think is going to be a potentially interesting secondary direction. I don't know whether Valve will do it. Um, there's a little bit of me that remembers the old embrace, extend, extinguish.
Hmm.
Now, at the moment, Proton embraces the Windows APIs and
Hmm.
says, "Hey, whatever you can run on Windows will come and run over on your Steam Deck." Um, but we've just extended it and we've got some new APIs in Proton that you can use that makes graphics easier or
Yeah, yeah.
multiple processing better or
Yeah.
whatever. Just use these, and slowly what we could see is Proton becoming a platform in its own right. Whether that extinguishes Windows, I don't think that's possible yet. Um, but it could become a platform in its own right, a whole
Yeah.
target for itself that Steam can then port back to Windows, funnily enough, if it wants to,
Yeah.
or to any other platform that it so wishes.
Yeah. I can definitely see that happening. Um, I yeah, I don't know if that's like a play that Valve is really worried about. Like what
No.
Valve is worried about, and I'm not. I might make the odd joke, but I'm not beholden to the good guy Gabe kind of culture around Valve. What Valve actually wants is to keep Steam relevant because there's a
Yes.
lot of competition with Epic Games Store and yeah, just other game stores in general. And if they create the Steam Deck, which I know a number of people will buy, the easier way. And it's not going to be like they've been very clever because they know that the PC gaming crowd is not going to accept, and I like this. They won't accept a lockdown product,
Hmm.
um, but they have kind of made it easier. The path of least resistance is going to be Steam,
Yes.
and they've already got a certain amount of goodwill in that regard, in terms of people wanting to use Steam over Epic. So this is just going to add that other nudge, and like let's assume that they're selling these at cost because I think a lot of it, when you look into details of it, kind of suggests they are certainly on the higher end models.
Yes.
Then they only have to sell 2 or 3 games extra. Maybe not even that. Maybe one game extra per purchaser. It's probably going to happen. It's not difficult for you to imagine that. Really, could well be worthwhile.
It's a very interesting play when you think about it like that. If I'm already a gamer, what the Steam Deck, and I've got my computer set up here, and this is where I play games. By having a
The stream's going now. I'm losing the stream and I'm losing Ben.
games because
I lost you
I'm
for a
playing more.
moment there, sorry.
Oh, wonderful. What
I've
did you get up to?
No idea what happened. I got up to basically the beginning of whatever you were talking about.
Wonderful. I'll just zip back and say that again
Yeah.
then. So it's interesting. If I'm a gamer and here I am, and this is all my computer stuff that I normally play on, then if I've got a portable computer that's
Mhm.
broadly equivalent that I can take anywhere,
Mhm.
I've got more chance of playing a game, and therefore I am more likely to buy more
Yes. Yeah,
to
that's
play
right.
in that time.
Yeah.
And so, yes, even if they are playing by cost, and even if they do need a few games purchased to make profit,
Yeah.
um, by the sheer fact that I can take this places and play it,
Yeah.
I'm going to spend more time playing games. I'm probably going to want to play
Yeah.
more games.
Yeah, totally. And like I mean, it may not be as much of an issue in the current situation, but like I could totally imagine myself taking the X Player or Steam Deck into an office environment,
Mm,
even a fairly professional office, and being okay tucking myself away in a corner somewhere on my lunch break, and being able to get a game or two in. That I think in a lot of offices would be difficult to do any other way. Like I've been in some offices where starting up a game in your lunch hour was kind of acceptable. But again, security is another part of the problem there. But yeah, I
that
think the X Player and the Steam Deck would definitely be good contenders for that kind of situation.
that's a really interesting point, actually, from the security aspect. I was thinking that I could well imagine probably 20 or so years ago.
Mm.
Um, I could well imagine people going into the office with a Game Boy Color
Mm-hmm.
and playing something on their lunch break. 20 years ago would put us probably pretty much into prime Pokemon era. So I
Yeah.
could well imagine people going into an office and playing Pokemon on their lunch break. And it's interesting that I want to say, and obviously all this is like a year and a half outdated now, but I'd like to say that I didn't see that so much in recent times. I even now when your phone
Mm.
is a mobile communications device and also a mobile gaming console.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I didn't see people overly at lunchtime using it to play games.
Okay, so I definitely did have some colleagues that play some mobile games at lunch,
Mm,
and a few would bring in their Switch. Um, I mean, I still have these colleagues; they are still colleagues of mine, but they are now also working from home,
from home.
so there's less of an issue. But even then, like, maybe yeah, for me at least, I think just being able to move and play somewhere else in the house is
Yes.
quite nice. Not being locked to a desk lets you stretch a little bit. And it's also been good. I did a train journey recently, and yeah, it was really nice being able to play PC games on the train and not have to, entertain myself with something that is. Yeah, I always find mobile entertainment in that sense kind of weird because you're kind of in an artificial situation. You're not watching or consuming the stuff you would normally consume for fun. You've just packed a bunch of stuff that will at least keep you vaguely occupied for
And
however long.
that's funny because I find that it never does. I can take a book on a train, I can take a laptop on the train and think I've got this
Yeah,
blog post that I want to write or this bit of work that I'd like to do or some side
yeah, it
project that I'd
never
like to have a go at.
works.
And I always look to the window and there's far more interesting things going by out there. Um, but actually, thinking back again back to a time when maybe I would take a Game Boy somewhere. Um, Having an immersive game really did, wherever you were,
Mm.
um, suck you in and keep your attention.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, totally. The other thing I want to talk about is the control scheme side of things and the rebinding. I don't know if you played around with Steam input kind of customization side of things.
I haven't, but very quickly I found my Game Boy.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that's fair.
Sorry, no, I haven't.
That's cool. Yeah, so they largely support pretty much every controller that you can imagine, but certainly like all of the mainstream consoles. And then you can basically rebind it to any other input, including other controller inputs and keyboard, mouse. There's a bunch of different profiles you can set. I will say it's a little bit awkward in that the UI is forcibly contained within big picture mode, so it's sort of a little bit awkward getting in and out of it. Yeah.
So I've played. Sorry, now you've said that, I've got a Steam controller,
Ah, yes.
and
Yeah.
and have so used it for that, and I found that to be extremely counterintuitive. Um,
Right.
I've really struggled with that
It
particular setup, and I think as well it doesn't help the fact that the Steam controller is unique, shall we say?
yeah. So I did. Yeah, they definitely have learning curves, and I think Steam input with a regular Xbox controller makes a lot more sense.
Mm.
In terms of like being easier to configure. But with a Steam controller, it is a lot more powerful. Like,
Yes.
um, I think it's one of these trade-offs again between ease of use and the power that you've got behind it. You can have like I don't know how much you use the Steam controller. I've got a few of them, but you can use gyro aiming. So this is, I think, Nintendo Switch players might be familiar with it. But basically, when you put your finger on the pad, it activates the gyro so that you can fine tune your aim with the gyroscope.
Physically moving the controller around.
Yeah, exactly. And you use the thumbstick for larger movements. So you've kind of got that sensitivity control that you would have with a mouse. You kind of get with the controller. And I must say that was incredibly intuitive when I was trying that. Like, I will admit, difficult to configure for each game because every single game is going to work in a slightly different way. But once you got it working, it how you just pick. Even it was a number of years ago, but I don't remember having to learn how to use a mouse. Like, it made sense that you move the mouse, it moves the cursor. Like, it's intuitive in that way.
Yes.
And the Steam Deck does have the trackpads on it. They're definitely smaller, and I'm hopeful that they will still be able to work. That being said, I've played an awful lot of Dyson Sphere Program, which is a factory game, largely mouse driven. I've played an awful lot of that on my X player, and again with Steam bindings, and it works surprisingly well with a combination of sort of touchscreen and joystick controls controlling the mouse. There was pretty much nothing I couldn't do, even with relatively limited binding. Like, even if I kind of limit myself to fairly simple bindings. Though again, I might be somewhat unusual in that I'm willing to go in and tweak the bindings, whereas most people just want to pick up and play. And I think they've still got some of that problem with the Steam Deck.
Yes, I think it's interesting. I wonder how many people are in your shoes versus in mine. I find that some of the really immersive games that I used to enjoy, or games that are like games that I used to enjoy, that are really immersive, and take the you need to put, say, 5 or 10 hours into them to get the most out of them.
Yeah.
Because you need to learn a lot. You need to and that can't be all on, like, a welcome screen. You've got to live it to learn it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't have that time anymore to put into that, and so when you've now got a bit of hardware that you need to put the time into to get the aiming just right, or to get your particular
Yeah.
feel of the controls there. Um, it becomes slightly tedious that I spend, let's say half an hour doing that, and now I spend 15 minutes playing a game
So
before I need to go do something else.
So
The
one thing I
thing,
will say is the default control, the community controls are normally good enough to get going with.
yes,
So what I'll normally do is start with the community control and then just tweak it from there. And
mm,
I suppose I wouldn't. Some people might be okay with just going with the community controls and not tweaking as much. But I think the problem with that is a lot of the time the community, like the most popular community controls, will be ones done by people who have played a lot of that game on the
yes,
controller, and therefore have customized it to a large extent, which makes it more difficult to learn. Like they've not been focused on how do we keep this as simple and straightforward as possible. So I definitely think like there's problems with it in that sense. That's the same problems that the Steam controller had. I think it's
mm,
smaller because they already have that library of control schemes, but not completely solved. Um, yeah, I'm looking forward to it. My pre-order's in. Hopefully, I'll be able to save up money until until I can get it ordered. But we'll have to wait and see. I also find the I suppose the size of it interesting in terms of it feels like we've managed to like I've been following these sort of small handheld devices for a while now, and it feels like the amount of processing power they've been able to cram into a small space has gone up quite dramatically over the last 5 years.
hmm
And I don't know. I found that really interesting. That this seems to be one of the product categories that's enabling for that I suppose really started with making very thin laptops
yes.
and has then progressed to gaming handhelds as a relatively niche offshoot of that. But yeah, I don't know. It's cool. I've really enjoyed my X player. I'm hoping to enjoy Steam Deck. Yeah. Have you got any other thoughts or questions?
Uh, so just things that were sort of swirling around in my head when you were just saying that. Not directly about the Steam Deck, but it's incredible when you think that um, sort of 13 or so years of smartphones, what they've given to us in
Yes.
for the rest of technology, because by all the lessons learnt from, fair enough, it's not the same CPU architecture,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a different use case, but all of the hardware lessons we've learnt by taking a mobile phone and shrinking it, taking a touchscreen and shrinking it, batteries,
Mm-hmm.
all of that, and wanting to get more and more out of these devices for longer and longer.
Yeah,
How
the
we've
battery
seen
tech, the
them,
screen tech, it's all being used in the Steam Deck.
yeah,
Yeah.
how we've then got that back into laptops, and exactly then how it's all fed back into things like the Steam
Yeah.
Deck is incredible. And I guess last question. If we look again at something like the Switch, it's very much positioned, as far as I'm aware, to being a games console in the traditional sense, and also a handheld. Like you can dock it and
Mm-hmm.
still you take the things off the end, and it becomes a more like a Wii style
Yeah.
games console. I'm guessing that the Steam Deck is a handheld first.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
does it then
definitely.
have um, fairly simple docking
It's got
capabilities, and
full USB-C functionality, Thunderbolt 4, I believe.
but presumably there's nothing that comes out for
No,
controls. You'd have to have a separate controller.
just a separate controller, but it will have a desktop interface. So
Nice.
you will be able to get to a desktop and dig in. I assume open up a terminal and dig in to how it's all working behind the scenes if you so wish.
The real
Um,
clever thing there, and I wonder if they have done anything like this, is if it can detect whether it's on a TV and therefore go into like big picture mode versus a um, computer monitor and go into more of a desktop mode. Because uh, I can't imagine. Well, I've tried working on a TV,
mhm.
kind of doesn't work that well.
Yeah, so they're replacing big pitch mode with this new UI that they've developed for the Steam Deck. Hopefully, by the sound of it, they want that to go out to everyone as well. Like, so even on Windows, you should be able to access that. And that, no, it's gone. It's the problem with live stream. This is what you miss when we edit.
Big picture mode, TVs, monitors.
Yeah, so it's been a very long time since they updated big picture mode.
Yeah,
and I'm hopeful that this smaller device, like that smaller interface, will kind of breathe some new life into it, because I've used big picture mode quite extensively in when I had a Steam machine, because I built one myself, and a bunch of other locations. I've had the Steam Links for streaming as well, and I think, interestingly, when it all kind of there's this idea of like casual PC gaming. This is very kind of almost sounds like an oxymoron, but it's like there are times where you want to just veg and play your games, even if it's not an ideal solution, but like from the sofa or from bed or from the office.
Yeah.
And I think the handheld format is probably the perfect perfect way of satisfying that demand or that requirement, because you don't have to, if you built a Steam box, you've got to have one on every single computer.
Yeah.
And the Steam Link tried to solve that, but wasn't ideal. Whereas having it as a handheld means you can just go and pick it up and take it wherever you want, and it just follows you around and gives you that casual experience for PC gaming, I think, but without quite as much outlay as would perhaps be required. I got there in the end. That was most of it. Yeah, I think that's everything I really wanted to cover. I'm hopeful. I really hope that Proton succeeds. Really, really hopeful that it does get up to maybe not 100%. I think that's a bit unrealistic, but high 90s for game compatibility. Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, it's been pretty good. I'm a very casual gamer. It's been very good for everything that I've wanted it for.
What sort of games have you played with Proton? Do you know?
Well, as I said at the beginning, I'm not really that confident in which games are Proton and which ones aren't.
Yeah.
Because aside from the few that I've needed to go and manually say, I try playing this on Proton, of which I've forgotten which they are. The native ones and the Proton ones are just sitting there in my library next to each other with no indication as to which one's which.
Just whatever. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
That's good. Have you got an outro ready? Or
I do.
You do. Okay. I will replay the intro because I get time
Give me the nod
to output the intro.
Cool. Give me the nod and I'll do it. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe our YouTube channel, linked in the show notes. You can also follow us on Twitter at tech_point_0. We hope you join us again for the next episode.
Bye.